So there's a few things I'm thinking about when I'm glassing or spotting a big hillside. Um, there's a lot of ground to cover with your optics. I have a bit of a systematic approach, and the first thing I'm thinking about is I always carefully look at the ground that's closest to me, so within 40 or 50 or 100 yards, and spend time carefully picking through that terrain. Because obviously, if there's deer or game in that zone, they're most likely to see you. Naturally, your eyes are kind of drawn to the open places and the open hillside above you, but where the deer typically are will be in the thicker spots, and that includes areas close to you. So I take the time to take a look at those zones that are closest to me first, and then work my way out. The next priority for areas that I would look at, I typically look at the ridges or benches where deer typically like to travel. So I'll kind of, as a overview of the whole hill, I'll just quickly take my binoculars and I'll look at the what looks like the most used travel corridors for game. And often you'll spot them coming and going. After that, I'll start focusing on areas where they typically like to feed. I usually find deer in gullies. They seem to like gullies because there's maybe a bit more moisture, higher quality food. There's often more cover too. Now it's often hard to spot them in gullies because there's more vegetation that would act as cover. So you just got to spend some time and really pick through the cover and see if you can identify parts of a deer. The one thing you got to keep in mind when we're doing this is rarely will you actually see a silhouette of a deer broadside on the hill. More often you'll be seeing a bit of movement or parts of a deer. And you have to start training your eye to look through the brush or through the trees and to start to see pieces of deer. Get used to the curve of the ears, get used to the curve of the ass, get used to the barrel of the chest. And eventually you'll see a part of a deer as you're glassing over it, and that'll key your brain into focusing in on that spot, and eventually you'll see what's a deer. So normally I'll start glassing an area with my binoculars. You have a much wider field of view with your binoculars so you can see more ground. And I'm looking for those keys like movement or maybe a bit of white from the rump of a sheep or a deer. And then eventually I'm going to see something that's going to key my interest. And I'm going to want to have a closer look at it with my scope. Now it's really important now to, when you see that spot where the animal either ducked under cover or you see a part of an animal, look for a real notable landmark nearby that spot. So there's a deer up on the hill here, and I see a big broken off snag that I'm going to use as my landmark. And then I'm going to switch over to my scope. The scope has a much smaller field of view, so you can't see quite as much width in your field of view. So I'm going to try and find that big broken off snag. There it is. And then I'm going to follow it down. And there's the deer. Oop, there he is. And it's a doe. So I spotted one deer on the hill here. Now typically deer rarely hang out alone. And if you see one deer, that's a good sign to keep looking in that area really carefully, because they're usually in groups. This particular hillside we're looking at, it's a nice open burn, or if you're up in the alpine, it's nice open meadows and whatnot. But rarely can you see all of the hill, or even there's often so much cover that you can't even notice from where you're sitting way back here, that deer can just disappear behind willows or tall grasses, or even a roll in the hill, right? So it's amazing. You'll be looking at one deer, and then all of a sudden there's 4 deer, and then there's 8 deer, and then there's no deer. And as they just sort of move slightly around the hillside, they just get covered up, and then they all appear again. So you got to be patient once you find a few deer, and watch them for a while. And now there's 2 deer. Perfect. So the last thought is, at some point you'll see an animal that you want to go after, and this is kind of the fun part. You'll get to plan a route up to where those animals are. So these animals up here are in kind of a perfect spot because they're just on the lee side of a ridge here, and I can go up the other side of the ridge and maintain cover, and then hopefully pop up and over and have a look at those deer within shooting range. And that's kind of my favorite part of spot and stalk hunting, is that you get to, first of all, you get to spend time looking over big beautiful terrain, finding game with your optics. And then the fun part is then you get to go up and try and see if you can plan a stalk that works out to your benefit. And that's an opportunity to really read the terrain in front of you and pick a route out where you can stay downwind and out of view. You want to avoid silhouetting your body there as you climb up over the ridges, and you want to maintain cover as you move in toward the game. In perfect circumstances, you can get in within 100 yards or so. Yesterday on our spot and stalk hunt, we got right into within about 40 yards, which was fantastic. So a couple of drawbacks of spot and stalk hunting is that you'll see animals from a long distance, and there will be the urge to shoot from a long distance because you're going to see that animal from 300 yards away, or you're going to get to a place where you're 300 yards away from that animal, and you're going to be tempted to try and shoot that animal at a long distance. Now granted, some people practice at those long ranges and have the capacity and skill to make that shot. Personally, I don't. I don't spend that time shooting at long ranges. I practice shooting at 100 yards, which is typically how far away deer are when I see them. So that's one of the challenges, is resisting that urge and working your way closer into the animal to shoot within your range that you've practiced and have the confidence in shooting at. So spot and stalk hunting is one of my favorite hunts, and it's a lot of fun. But there's a couple things that you got to keep in mind when you're out here doing this. Number one is you got to make sure that if you're going to commit to going after an animal, that you got means and time and the ability to get that animal back to camp. The other one that happens to me, and it happened to us yesterday, is that we spotted a nice buck at 500 yards away. And it was a real challenging stalk to get in on him, given the lay of the land. And I have to be honest, I was tempted to shoot him at 400 yards. And I'm not capable of that shot. But that urge came up. Now, I know better, and the plan was I was going to get closer. And we wound up stalking into a couple hundred yards of him, and I looked at him there, and I saw an opportunity to get to within 100 yards. I took that opportunity, and eventually we got him at about 40 yards. But you'll see animals at long distances while you're spot and stalking. You'll see them at 300 yards, and you're going to be tempted to shoot them. And unless you practice lots shooting at that range, it is not an ethical decision to make to try and harvest that animal at that range. Look for that opportunity to get closer, and you'll have greater success, and you won't miss.